So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. It's fun to have a way to connect in this world the way it is right now. So it's kind of calming, you know, to know that this is coming. I can see you guys. It's a good thing. All right. Let me find my PowerPoint. So tonight is going to be part PowerPoint, part not, and then back again, and then we'll chat. So welcome. I am Heidi Edwards Dunn. I think you all that are on here know that now. My company is Dynamic Quilting, and my mission is no more quilt clones. Hashtag no more quilt clones. And today, as you know, we're talking about borders and trying to not make your quilt just bigger, but both better and bigger. Snoopy. And you know, all of you know who I am, so I am not going to go through this again. But you are, I just have been laughing every time I see this picture, because it was a couple of years ago, first of all, but second of all, my hair is so much longer now because I haven't been to the salon in so many months. It's, you know, way down, almost, it's past my shoulders. So I'm have an appointment on Thursday.
Yay!
Yay! Ready to have less of it. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the purpose of borders, the types of borders, and then how do you make them so that they fit your quilt? How do you choose borders to fit your quilt? And I'm going to see if this link will work. Are you seeing that webpage? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So a little tiny bit of history, and this is a fun website I just happened to find, that when quilters first started actually creating quilts in like this early 1700s to 1800s, mostly they were making medallion quilts. So it was like a central image, whether it was a piece of fabric, whether they appliqued like broderie pierce, where they would take purse, where they would cut out a design from a fabric and applique it onto another piece of fabric. And then eventually when they started piecing the interior of the quilt, it still was, the borders were definitely the most volume of the quilt. They took up the most square footage. And because really all they were doing was framing that central piece. So here's one that has, I don't know, is this Lady of the Lake or Delectable Mountains or something, with all those tiny little triangles. Oh. And they used to create quilts for four-poster beds, right? So that they the post could go right in between, and the quilt could go over on one side, over on the other. You wouldn't have a little bunching going on down the bottom. Kind of fun. And that's a big medallion that they had in the middle, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And then this one is fun because I was, you know, I have never done a sawtooth triangle border. Way too much work. But, you know, they would do it by hand. And so it was much less, you know, trying to get all the triangles to fit, because fabric is wonderful because it moves, and you know, you can move it. So with their hand needles, it was a lot easier. And it's fun. The 9-patch border that they've got here, you could tell they really designed it, because they switched the light and dark placement, so that the light squares were what you the value of it is making you be able to see this little cross in the middle. So it's really fun that, you know, they switched it up and didn't just do the normal 9-patch quilt or 9-patch pattern, value pattern. Okay, enough of that. So I wonder how I get back to this. Yes, that. Okay. We're going to take a break from the slideshow for a minute. And thinking about, so that's the history, what, or the purpose in history was to make the quilts bigger, right? But they also showed off their skills, right? They had a lot of all those sawtooth borders. Those are just astounding. But now, what do we use borders for? Most of our quilts will have blocks in rows, or perhaps in sections, or in a concentric. It's not a concentric circle. Is it a concentric square or rectangle? And they need a frame, right? It was fun because the Facebook post I had up, that's what somebody responded is, well, you use it to frame your quilt. You know, that's what a border's for. And especially for a wall quilt, that's so true, right? You want it to help the quilt to stand out, not the border to stand out. You want to add borders so they fit a bed, and to reflect back what's in the quilt. So if you've got a design in the quilt and you want to reflect that back out into the borders, it gives you a chance to repeat that theme. You can continue a flow. You can keep your quilt flowing out from the center, so the borders aren't really stopping it. Maybe your binding is what's stopping the way the pattern and the design flows out. Maybe you're making a statement. Maybe you're actually putting words on your quilt and making a statement that way, and you need the border space in order to do that. Maybe you want space to do some embellishment, and having that empty space in a border is a nice way to do that. So the types of borders. We have basic solid strip of fabric, right? Could be solid, could be patterned, could be the same that's in your quilt, could be something different. Maybe adding mitered corners or squared off corners or cornerstone blocks, those corner blocks. If you're using the same as in the quilt, you hope that you bought enough so you're not running out of fabric. I'll show you one of mine. And that often gives you the chance to go, okay, now what am I going to do? And sometimes you find something even better, right? A border could be a fresh element. Maybe you need something that helps the quilt look like it belongs together. You could use a fabric connector type of patterned fabric. Maybe it's a stripe that brings together a couple of the colors, pink and electric blue or something, and helps to bring those colors together so it looks like it helps the interior of the quilt actually look like it belongs together even more than it did before. Yes, you could do an applique border. Not me, but many people do. And if you do a pieced border or an applique border, usually people would choose to do the same style or the same technique as what's in the interior of their quilt on their border. You can mix it up. There are quilts from history that we see that are pieced in the center and have applique, leaves and vines and so forth around the edges, and it works. But the norm is to reflect the same thing. If you've got a pieced center, you could do piece borders. It doesn't mean you have to follow the rules, though. And a reason to use, not just strips of fabric, but some piecing might be that your quilt is very quiet. And that's not a bad thing, but maybe you want to highlight a couple of those colors, or maybe you want to help people to see the center, help their focus to come to the center of the quilt. Because if it's quiet, you kind of, might like walk by it and not even notice it. So you want to help provide the viewer with a reason to look at the quilt. So you might add something around the outside, some kind of border that helps to focus people in. And maybe you have a wild quilt and it needs to be contained. It needs a little help having its edges so that your people can again focus on the quilt itself. Your personality comes out in your quilt designs, I think. Whether you're using a pattern and choosing fabrics, whether you're designing it all yourself, you want to like this thing when you're done, right? You put a lot of work into this thing. So finding what makes you happy and what is going to make the quilt happy is a good thing. Okay, so I have a few thoughts there. They might give you some decision points for helping to think about borders. It doesn't mean that we're going to solve it, because every quilt is different, and so you have to rethink it every single time, make decisions every single time. And by not choosing, you're still making a decision, right? So whether the quilt doesn't need a border, that's a decision. If you're just going to use, I have the inspiration fabric, I'm just going to use that. Well, that's still a decision, whether it's the right decision or you're not thrilled when you're done. It's still, you've made that decision because you just did it. So it's taking a step back and thinking. That's the rule here. All right, so we're going to go back to here. Share my screen again, making it more complicated by having to do this. Oh, are you seeing the one slide, or are you seeing black?
There's one slide and it's sort of a lot of black behind it.
Okay, then I shared the wrong screen. We're gonna do this. There, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're still on Fit the Quilt, but now we're going to, if it'll move. There we go. So we go back to really taking a step back, as I just said, to take a look at what are you trying to do with this quilt? Are you just trying to have something that somebody can put on their bed and that's the size it needs to be, and yep, they're going to work. You're going to choose something that matches the room and everything's going to be fine. That is your overall goal. You're done. It's great. If your overall goal is to make a warm and cozy quilt, you're going to choose a different kind of, first of all, your design is going to be different, but you're going to choose a different kind of border probably than if you're trying to make just a happy, bright, cheery quilt, or maybe a bed quilt has a different look than a wall quilt. So what's your overall plan with this quilt? And this dynamic quilting color and fabric plan is, I thought, oh, you need your goal. This is perfect. I'm going to show you this. So at the end, I'll show you what this is, but you may already have this. I know a couple of you have downloaded it for sure. All right. So the big question is, what does your quilt need now? Maybe it needs no borders. We're going to see a quilt in a little while that the quilter says probably doesn't need borders. And that is a totally legitimate answer. And the thing is that if unless you're stitching your quilt and turning it inside out, or some other fashion to not have a binding around it, you're still going to have some kind of end, right? You're still going to have some kind of edging. So thinking about, even if it's not a border, what is it that's going to end your quilt, even without a border? Different widths borders. We're going from the easy or the simple choices to a little bit more complicated choices. So these are different widths. The one on the right, it's got a little light blue border and then a really wide, darker border. And it was to sort of look like you're looking out a window, okay? It's my backyard, sort of. The one on the left is the one I just finished. And
Beautiful.
this has, quite a wide border here, and this one is very narrow. So often you'd do it more like this, where the narrow border would be first, and then you'd have the wide border. This one didn't work that way. But that's something you can do, is different choices of widths. And usually when I have found that a good rule of thumb is to use a measurement that is in your quilt somewhere. So for the width of the border. So like this squiggly one is 4 inches wide, which is the same width as one of the blocks in the smaller 9 patches. And this one here is the width of one of the little blocks in the 9 patches. Not that you have to do that, but it just, design-wise, it helps your eye to feel like it belongs there. You can double it and then it still works, design-wise. Whatever your eye imagines. You could do half one fabric, half another on the same, in the same border. So this one on the left, truthfully, I just couldn't decide which one I liked better. So I did all the way around, but I did 2 sides of the orange and 2 sides of the yellow, and then switched them out on the other sides. Usually you'd probably do like a half, like from one corner through the right angle down to the bottom of the other corner. So you've got kind of like this side of the quilt, and then the other side of the quilt, like almost to look like a log cabin, if you slice it in half, quarter or a half square triangle. And it really works better to use mitered corners in that case, because it usually just makes it look more like, oh, you planned this, it wasn't a mistake. And then this one on the right, it still has 2 fabrics, but they're on the same side. So it was the value that I was trying to show, the change in value from the inside out. So I wanted, this narrow border helps to contain the quilt, but I wanted it to explode past that. And by using these 2 different black and whites, one's a darker value, one's a lighter value, even though they're on the same, you've got the same fabrics, 2 of the same fabrics on each side. That's what I was trying to say. Half of one, half of another.
I love that one.
Mm.
This one, pinwheel. I like
Yeah,
that.
I love that pinwheel.
That's one of my favorites. Okay. You could use corner blocks. And here I did, although usually it would look a little different because you'd have, I wanted this yellow to flow out through the corners, to look like it was dripping out through the corners. So I used the darks in this 9 patch are the same fabric as this narrow border. So that it looks like the attempt is that it looks like the yellow is kind of floating there and flowing out. Whereas if these were, you know, this squiggly fabric, you would see this, oops, sorry. You would see this narrow border more distinctly, and these yellow squares would look like they were floating in this fabric. You can see my mouse, right? As I'm, okay. And you know, I started with just a yellow square, a yellow block, and that's what it was going to be, was nice and solid and simple. So you can do all kinds of things with those corner blocks. It could just be a gold, you know, it could have been a yellow-orange block. But then it wasn't. You can do something different with your borders. And I just named this border extensions today. I don't know if I like that term, but we're using it for now. But for quite a while, I remember I was working on a quilt and I was ready for it to be done. And I did, you know, every time I put a border on, it gets wavy. And then, you know, by the time you get your second or third one on there, it's really wavy. And I still can't get them right. So I started by just stitching I had 2 or 3 borders I was doing, stitching all the borders together and then putting that whole section on the quilt. And so then and I liked the effect. So I started using it in my smaller quilts as well, here and there. And so from this bottom corner of the central piece up, I stitched these 2 pieces together, and then the same on this side, and then just add the top and bottom. So it's just a way to expand what you're looking at, you know, gives you, it's a little design element. Yeah, and this one on this side, you can't see, there's more blue on this quilt. And so these just, all 4 extend off into the edges. And then this one, it's almost not even the border, but it's using the same principle to kind of help you expand what you're looking at. So you can make up anything you want, and as long as you do it, it's legitimate. So, okay, so this is one of those quilts that I started, and it was supposed to have like 2 or 3 times as many blocks, and I was tired of it all. It took me forever. So the blue back here was going to just be all the borders all the way around. Well, then I ran out. So I added this stripe fabric, which is actually in the quilt somewhere, I think. I don't think it's this piece of fabric. Maybe it may not even be in the quilt. It may have been something else that I had. Sorry?
It is. I can see it.
Well,
Yeah.
this one right here, it's not this one. Do you see it someplace?
I would say go over to the 3rd row, that right there.
Yeah, this is exactly the same as this.
Oh, it is.
But I think this is a batik, and this is actually a woven stripe.
Oh, okay.
You couldn't tell from the picture. It's just what I remember. Anyway, it looks just like the other one, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it worked.
Of course.
So I added a piece here, and then you can't really see it, but off on this end, close to us, there's another piece of the stripe. And then I got really bored. I didn't know what to do with the borders because I didn't want to, she loves green, but I didn't want to make it all green. So I did the top and the bottom in the pinks and purples. And, oh, I guess I forgot to talk about this earlier, but you know, there are different ways to, if you're doing straight borders and not mitering the corners, usually you choose to either have both the verticals start at the top and go all the way to the bottom, and then the horizontals would go in between,
Mhm.
or vice versa. You know, you put the top of the building across and the bottom of the building, and have the sides, the vertical would be like this one, right from here down to the top of the bottom border. Reminds me of Lincoln Logs, you know. But this one, I don't know why, but I went all the way across. So you know, it would be the same if you think about it all the way around. Each corner is going to look like this. You're going to have all the way to the end of the border, and then the next border starts, and it goes all the way to the other side of the border, the next border. And it, you know, it helps keep your eye moving around. And
Yeah.
I tell you, I was bored, so I had to, all those long strips to stitch, right? Okay.
Yeah.
You'd think that I hate this. I really don't. I really do like this. There's another different thing you can do is flanges. And we talked about these on this call a couple times ago, I think. And it's funny because when I looked it up to make sure I was actually using the right term, there was somebody's website said, okay, so the correct term in quilting is flange. But if you go to Webster's dictionary, it's not there. But it really is, that's what we call it. And I know at least one of you has used this before. It's this little strip of fabric right here. And all it is, and we talked about this, I think maybe I said, it's just a piece of fabric folded in half and stitched down. And, you know, this one would have been tiny, probably a 1/4 inch, maybe. This is a very small quilt, like 8 by 10 or 10 by 12 or something. And whereas on this one, I think I made it 3/8 inch because it was a bigger piece, and I wanted to make sure that it worked. But like here, I only did it on 2 sides. And then this is the same fabric there. So you know, the flange was just adding some dimension, and it was too boring with just the pink coming down. And that's what happened over here is I was having a really hard time. I was almost done. I couldn't decide on the binding fabric. And it shouldn't be that hard, right? And I tried all the lights, I tried all the darks, I tried the mediums, and none of the black and whites really were doing it. And I blame it on my choice of this border right here. Nothing was really working. And the yellows just weren't working either. You know, they looked kind of thin, you know, because they were a light. So then I found another piece of fabric that I hadn't used in the quilt. And it has, you can see one little spot here. It has little tiny pink and green and blue splotches in it. And so it's the only yellow fabric that has, or yellow-orange fabric that has other colors in it. And I didn't have enough to do the border out of that. I mean, the binding. So I found it, I liked it. It worked to separate the binding from the rest of the quilt, helped to kind of frame the quilt. So that's what I went with. So those are flanges there. All right. And then you can do a whole combination. You know, you can put strips with pieces, with piece borders and border extensions. And this one looks a little different because just the narrow parts are going out. So, and I guess you could call this a medallion quilt, right?
Yeah.
So you can, you know, do any combination. And I think it really is, try something, you know, don't stitch it together if you can get away with just looking at it. Step back, think about it. If you like it, then go with it. You know, make up something, just do it the way you always do it. But as long as you're happy with it and you think that it helps the quilt and it does what the quilt needs, that's all that matters. So this is the Dynamic Quilting Color and Fabric Plan. It helps you choose fabrics for your quilt, lets you think about what the overall quilt plan is, and then this one, it helps you if you start with an inspiration fabric, and then you use that to then build out with the other pieces. And I think you're all on my email list, but if you're not, you can download or you can download it anyway, and then be on my email list. And I think you all know about all of this. So